Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the fifth session of the Hospitality Resilience series, which follows our sessions on adaptability, nutrition, personal transformation, and sleep. My name is Jonathan Humphreys from HoCoSo, and I'm pleased to be joined by my co-hosts Chris Mumford from Service Leadership and HoCoSo, and John Hazan from Atlas Coaching and Events. Thank you for joining us today. And for those of you who are new to the Hospitality Resilience series, we want you to know that this is an interactive session, and we would like you to post as many questions as possible as we go along. So please post your questions in the Q&A, and we will pick them up and we will pose them to our special guest today. So Hospitality Resilience series, I guess in terms of resilience, there are many definitions out there, but essentially it's the ability for us to be able to adapt and respond in any given situation and to be able to do that appropriately. As we're going through this crisis, one thing is for sure, that the balance between order and chaos is clearly on the chaos side at the moment. And what we're finding is that as human beings, normally in order for us to be stable and sure in what we're doing, we need plans, we need goals, and we need certainty. And as I've just found out, we've just passed the 1 year mark in the UK at the start of this particular lockdown. Now, if we were told a year ago that we would be in lockdown for over a year, I think things would be definitely different in terms of the way we approach this. However, what is for sure difficult is that we have, and to coin a military term, which John and our guest Bruce Harkness will be familiar with, is the on the bus, off the bus. And that is basically when you are given a situation, which is, let's say we're going to have the first wave and we'll be open and everything will be fine. And then we have a second wave and there's now the potential for the third wave. So constantly getting on and off the bus, the unpredictable and uncertainty of the situations that we face ourselves in. We need something that allows us to be anchored and stable and to be sure in terms of our decision-making as leaders and with our teams. And hence the purpose of this Hospitality Resilience series, which is all about looking at our personal resilience and inner immunity. So thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoy this journey that you are partaking with us. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to my co-host, Mr. John Hazan. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Jonathan. So today we address uncertainty and chaos. For many of us in business today, the term VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is an all too familiar term and summarizes perhaps, as Jonathan was saying, what the last 12 months have been like for many of us. First coined in 1987 by Warren Bennis and Bert Nanas, VUCA has become perhaps the main term for what we're going through today, which is all very well and good. We know that. Things are uncertain. We don't need to be told that. But what is interesting is, how do we deal with this? How do we navigate our way through these uncertain times? And in some ways, the formation of the Hospitality Resilience series was Chris, Jonathan, and I's answer to that. Our look at our community, our look to share the knowledge with others, and to gain strength from those around us. That was what we did. Today's guest has addressed this question at both an organizational level and a personal level, and he's even gone so far as to write a book about it. So we are indeed very grateful to have his thoughts and insights around this today. Without further ado, to tell us more about Bruce's background, I'll hand over to Chris, but thank you for joining us.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Good to be here, and really delighted that we have Bruce with us. Bruce and I have known each other for close to 20 years, it's got to be. First met Bruce when he was in Brussels with Residor, as is now known as Radisson, in human resources for their Europe business. He then went on to hold senior HR leadership roles with Kempinski and Mövenpick, both of which conveniently were located in Switzerland, where he could indulge his love of mountain climbing. So I'm sure there's no coincidence in that. 10 years ago, Bruce moved back to his native Australia, joined TFE Hotels to head up the HR function there, before 7 years ago joining Wyndham Destinations in his current position, leading human resources, customer experience and communications across the Asia Pacific region. He's, I think, swapped his climbing boots for his surfboard and manages to hit the waves most morning. And it's incredible to think that he found time to write the book, Performance Matters, the Ultimate Career Survival Guide. And we're looking forward to hearing more about some of the learnings from that today. To my mind, you know, I interact a lot with the human resources folks in the global hotel business. And Bruce has always struck me as one of the more progressive and advanced thinkers in the space. So I think we're really honored to have you here today, Bruce, and looking forward to getting into the conversation. So let's kick off. Do you maybe, Bruce, as a kind of entree, want to kick off with, you know, how's life at Wyndham Destinations? How's the last year been? What is maybe some of the key kind of takeaways and learnings that organizationally you've found? And then we can progress the conversation down the road.
Right. Thanks, Chris. And I just wanted to say thank you as well for the opportunity to be here. And you're right. I do spend most of my mornings in the surf, all going well. So doing it tough down here in Australia. But thanks to you all for being here this morning. I know for many of you just starting your day out. For me, it's about heading just after 6 p.m. here in the evenings. So thank you. I guess where I want to start really is just to give a little bit of context, just in terms of where we are at the moment. We certainly moved beyond a place in time where work and life are separate. They have absolutely and categorically fused into one. And we'll talk more about that over the course of this discussion. And I say discussion as well, because I'm keen to field questions through the team that come to light. Look, much of what I'm saying here could be said to be known. Other aspects of it are deliberately intended to be thought-provoking as well. But let's just focus a little bit on where we're at. So some good news. The average lifespan of the Western world is progressed up to 82.5 years. And I say 0.5 years because all the time we get counts, right? The average working life is between 43 to 47 years. So that's also set to increase, as is the average lifespan. COVID, the reality of it is that it's had a seismic impact in terms of our workplace design, not only where we work, when we work, and how we work. And from that perspective, that is set to continue. The return to normal as we know it just simply won't happen. There's been too much time, too much water under the bridge in terms of that evolution for us to go back. Some facets will, because they proved to be of value, but other aspects in terms of workplace trends will change and are set to continue to change. Two elements that remain the same actually is what we do for work has a significant impact on our self-esteem, our self-worth, and ultimately to get the most out of our work, what we do needs to have meaning, or has been popularized, purpose. As was mentioned a little earlier, I've got the pleasure to work with Wyndham Destinations. My region is Asia Pacific and international operations. I report into Barry Robinson, who's on the global team of the Travel and Leisure Group, but he also oversees this region as well. And as Chris mentioned, I covered 3 key areas of the business. But we operate in a range of different areas with corporate offices in Shanghai, Clark, Singapore, and also Australia, with some 3,000 employees, about 70 properties. And we're a blended organization in terms of hotel management and vacation ownership in terms of our core business. So a lot of what I'm discussing today draws upon some of the experiences that I've had within our organization, but also the research that I've done in terms of putting together Performance Matters. So let's just continue to think a little bit about where we were. So in the middle of 2020, most of the world, Western world economy was in a recession. And the reality of that is organizations are a lot leaner. Technology's been fast-tracked, particularly in the area of employee communication. So Microsoft Teams, Zoom have become common language within organizations where actually for many, they weren't using those platforms previously. They've been fast-tracked and they're part of our normal, regular working environment now. Competition for work is on the rise, but it's not necessarily for good reasons. The reality is that it is an employer's market at present. And what I mean by that is there are more candidates on the market than there are jobs. That's the harsh reality of COVID and the resounding economic impact as well. So from that perspective, the importance of our own self-development, the presence of our personal brand, and building resilience in line with this series is so incredibly important. Workplace trends as well are changing considerably, and there are a number of key areas that have significantly changed as a result of the environment we find ourselves in now. One of them is mobility, which is having the ability to work anywhere, anytime, from any location. Choice, the workforce is now demanding the opportunity to work from home, as well as to be able to work within an office setting, and choosing the hours in which they do so, which needs to be managed by organizations. Privacy is around the delineation between understanding that those boundaries between our working life and private life have always almost fused into one. But the expectation is that organizations respect the privacy requirements of the workforce. Workplace design, as I'm sure none of you will be surprised, has significantly changed. The corporate office of past is in many ways is an era of bygone, purely because initially during COVID, for safety reasons, many corporate offices were closed down. But the question's being asked now, do we actually need that space? And do we need that space in its current format to successfully perform our work? And as a result of the impact of COVID, workplace well-being as a focus for organizations is no longer a luxury, it's an expectation to not only ensure that our workplaces are safe, but ultimately that organizations have programs in place to meet their employees' well-being. So some very, very significant changes. So just a short reflection. And the reality is our past does not determine future outcomes. That is a reality. So where we are now is about making those decisions that best move us forward. So the past is the past. COVID is COVID. It's what we do next that actually makes the difference. And self-development is ultimately mission critical to staying in tune as a leader with what's actually happening out there in the workplace. You know, a lot has been said about real growth, and real growth takes place in an area or zone of discomfort. Well, I don't think we could have asked for any more of a perfect storm in terms of discomfort than we currently face. But there is learning in that, and those that will surface and those that will march on will ultimately be those that actually learn from that change, from that discomfort. And change has always been a constant, particularly in the knowledge worker age. But the reality is that there is a compounding speed at which that change is taking place, which is making it so challenging to keep up with at an organizational level, innovation level, technology and leadership level as well. So embracing change is a necessity, but being nimble, adaptable and flexible is an absolute necessity. So that leads us nicely into the topic of leadership. And I've tried to sort of take a broad brush approach today in terms of the information I'm giving to make it most relevant to you. So if I look back to my career trajectory to date, In 1998, we saw the Asian economy crash. We shortly saw after that the emergence of bird flu, swine flu. September 11 occurred shortly thereafter. Iraq 1 and 2, conflict in Afghanistan and other areas of the world, followed closely hot on the heels by the global financial crisis, rounded up nicely by the global pandemic and COVID-19. So change and chaos is not a one-off event. And I'm sure all of you can look back on your careers and see not only those events, but a range of other events that have affected your organizations, industries, your role as a leader as well. So that is not a point of difference. That is a reality of the future. So what is our role as leaders? Well, our role is to sell certainty in uncertain times, which is about creating a vision, aligning that with a shared purpose, setting goals, putting those actions into place that will move us closer towards those goals, and measuring them accordingly.
Bruce, before we move on, can I just jump in this around this topic of leadership and challenges to leadership? Perhaps we've had a question from John Paul linked to the work from home conundrum that I think you as an organization are obviously challenged with at the moment. Jean-Paul says it's great to talk about head office and hotel jobs when you can do those from home. But what about employees who can't work from home? Waiters, chefs, chambermaid, receptionists. How are you as leaders, as an organization, embracing a challenge like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very, very easy in corporate land to move quite quickly to a work from home environment, or indeed elements which are phone based, but the practicalities of what we do remain true. If I can draw upon, in response to that question, what we've done a little bit within Wyndham Destinations is we put in a work plan for our resorts that was focused primarily on the well-being of both our associates, employees, and our guests. So we actually consulted with top-tier health authorities to ensure that we had the health routines, the people management strategies, the return to work strategies, and ongoing maintenance of the properties to ensure that our workforce was safe and that our guests were safe. So that's was mission critical for us. Within our region as well, we were one of the first to actually close our resorts in the interest of employee and guest safety and owner safety. So the realities of what people do, they work practically, in many cases physically, in an environment they need to be present. So for us, in short, it was about making sure that it was safe, firstly, and secondly, that there are ongoing protocols in place that they remain so.
And Bruce, as we kind of moved, I guess, from that initial immediate need to create that physical safety, what have, again, just on this topic of kind of the people on the ground in the operations, how have you been supporting them from a mental well-being kind of standpoint? Because, in a lot of the topics we're talking about today, some of this can be a little scary to people, talking about this zone of discomfort and, embracing chaos and so on. So, as an organization, how do you support people through that from a kind of more mental standpoint?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I touched on that a little earlier. The reality is workplace wellbeing programs are really a requirement going forward. We have a workplace safety and wellness program. And we've had that pre-COVID. That's been in place for quite some time, where we focus on physical well-being, financial well-being, workplace well-being of our associate base. But in response to COVID, we rolled out a mental health awareness program in partnership with an organizational psychology group that we work with extensively within the business, to ensure that first and foremost we had a program in place that equipped managers to identify when there were stresses within their teams. We also ensured that those individuals within those teams received information in terms of how they could manage their own resilience which we'll touch on a little bit later in the program.
Bruce, maybe I'd also just like to comment on this. Obviously there's two parts, I think, which have been highlighted with knowledge-based workers, with the global market competitiveness today, where essentially talent can come anywhere in the world to compete for a particular job. And also, at the operational level and grassroots level, where we're going to have unprecedented change in terms of technology. Owners are going to be driving for much more efficiencies going forward. Customers are going to have super high expectations in terms of experience delivery. So I would imagine there's a huge need for training for operations teams going forward through the hospitality space, in order to make sure that they are, basically future-proofed as much as possible for the changes that lie ahead. Yeah,
that's right, Jonathan. And the reality is the normal delivery mechanisms that we used, pre-COVID, have changed significantly. We've moved to almost totally online now, whereas for that more practical-based training, it was, experiential. It was on the job. It was face-to-face. But I was only speaking with somebody today actually around putting in a platform that allows us to feed out those types of training initiatives to frontline employees, but also the supervisory, managerial, and leadership levels as well. But that constant need for ongoing learning and development is still there. I think people have passed through the firestorm of when the pandemic first rolled out, and the expectation as well is that learning is to continue within organizations. But it is absolutely critical from an employer brand perspective, but also optimizing the engagement of workforces.
Okay. I guess there's also the match and the need for the organizations to be able to fund those programs in the right way as well. So I would imagine this should be, in theory, an increase in training and wellness budgets going forward by organizations that want to develop and keep their people relevant for the future.
Yeah, and it's about clever spend, isn't it? Because one of the first areas to go in these types of situations is obviously the training budget. So training, marketing, PR tend to suffer at these times. But the savvy companies will continue to supply that budget, that spend, probably at a far lesser level than it was, but actually delivering the training in a way that is far more clever, if you like, in terms of managing cost. So it's interesting. I've been to a number of conferences, as I'm sure we all have, and invariably at the end, in the topic of leadership, there's the leadership qualities list. I did not want to do that. And the other thing I didn't want to do today was use the word unprecedented, which is, globally a word that was probably overused. So my promise is I will not use that word this morning. But there have been a number of actual emerging qualities, if you like, that have been set to be paramount from a leadership perspective going forward. And perhaps for some of us, the word empathy was top of the list. The ability to empathize with your team and to empathize with individuals within your teams about their circumstance, personally, professionally, and the pressure that they're under. We're all doing more for a little bit less, and that pressure does show within our teams. Adaptability, perhaps no surprise in terms of that need to be able to change tack, or also another relatively well and overused word, to be able to pivot under pressure at short notice. Authenticity, so that ability to be transparent and authentic as a leader, because what COVID has done has given us all a great level of sobriety. We're all a little bit less tolerant to lack of transparency. So being authentic as a leader in terms of how you communicate status quo situation is super important. Followed closely by candor, which is essentially telling as it is. So these are expectations. So when our teams are looking up to us, and in some instances, new qualities or previous qualities that have now surfaced to the top.
Yeah, I could just maybe comment on that, Bruce, if I may. Having kind of studied leaders in hospitality for the last 20 years, I guess. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I think these are qualities which are always there, but I think they've been really put under the microscope and have received a renewed kind of focus during this time. The candor one is interesting to me, and I've been talking about this with some other people recently, and it's that ability to, as you say, to tell it like it is. But it's a balancing act, right? Because you want to, as a leader, be delivering hope and inspiration, but also do it in a way that doesn't make you look, like you're kind of just giving out empty phrases and empty statements. It needs to be grounded in some authenticity and genuineness. And I mean, anecdotally, a while back, someone was telling me about a leader who was, really good at letting the team know about all the good stuff that's going on, but would delegate any bad news to the rest of his team to share with their team. So it's just like, as a leader, you kind of need to own it all, and find a way to deliver the good and the bad, as you say. So just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's a great example, and I remember discussing this with you a little while back, Chris. I knew we were in trouble with COVID when the head of the World Health Organization said, wash your hands, cover your mouth when you cough, and avoid crowded spaces. More or less saying good luck, and that was at the highest levels of leadership. So, but you know what? I think most people respected that, and we understood clearly where we were. And you're absolutely right. I think the tolerance is less, and authenticity is a critical piece. But that candor and telling it as it is so important.
Bruce, can you? I'm one of the things I'm struggling with a bit on that slide, that previous slide, is the embracing of uncertainty. That seems fine. The selling of certainty. That's the bit I'm struggling with a bit, and because that in itself, if you're selling certainty, then that assumes that you have a very high level of predictability of outcome. And when it's relatively stable, there's a good chance that you can do that. When it's very unstable, which is the environment we're in at the moment, there's the likelihood of you being able to do that is pretty low. So have you seen examples where this has been done well? I guess this is down to the authenticity and the candor piece as well. Because I would like to understand how this is done well, because I understand the need for certainty within the teams and organizations, but at the same time, I'm sure people are turning around and go, that's just BS, right? Because no one knows what's going to be happening 4 weeks from now. So I'm just curious if you've seen some good examples of this.
Yeah, look, I mean, perhaps it might be interesting for for participants today to just hear on experience from down under. I mean, we've been through a very interesting period of time. Last year, or the end of 2019, 2020, you might remember the bushfires that took place down under, which were at a world scale and a first, followed closely by COVID, and we're in the midst now of some fairly catastrophic flooding in the southern Queensland and northern New South Wales borders and river areas. So there has been a significant amount of chaos, significant. In terms of selling certainty, what I've seen done quite well by authorities down here is actually, we will tell you where we are now, and we will tell you what we know now. What we can't guarantee is what the outcome will be. And that could be everything from the extent of the flooding that we're currently experiencing, what we're going to do in order to avoid it, and indeed measuring the overall impact at the end of the day when the flooding has subsided. So it's about really chunking it down from the point of view of, here's where we are, here's what we actually know, and we will give you more information when it comes to hand. I don't think in this type of an environment, particularly with these natural disasters, that the Australian population would expect from leadership any form of crystal balling in the absence of certainty. But what they do expect is that leadership tells us where we are and what will be done, and clarity around ultimately what that looks like. I don't think anybody's expecting any crystal balling.
I think that's so true, Bruce. That goes back to that point that Chris raised about authenticity and credibility. If a government or a leader is seen to be selling a dream that is too far removed from the reality, I think it underestimates people's ability to tell between the two. And I think just clear communications, some planning, and delivery with confidence. Perhaps it goes back to our military background as a leader. If we just gave a plan with confidence, even if we weren't entirely sure of its outcome, at least it was something. And that confidence and credibility and authenticity can start to cut through the chaos. If people have even a vague plan, it's something to follow. It gives them the confidence. It starts to restore their faith. And on we go. We've seen that in the UK with the government's recent issuing of the deadlines. Even this time they seem to have learned. It's like you say, we're not entirely sure what's happening. We're going to put some stuff out there. We hope to hold to this plan. Let's all behave ourselves and maybe it'll work. But yeah, I think that confidence and communication is critical.
Yeah, it's the old adage, isn't it? Hope is not a strategy. That's the reality of it. And leadership shouldn't be in the business of selling hope necessarily in when chaos is abound. It's about keeping it real. So just in the spirit of the series, actually, I did want to touch on a resilience model by a lady by the name of Dr. Catherine McEwen. And she's worked both here in Australia and is working with a psychologist in Europe as well. And they've developed this model called the Resilience at Work scale, which has identified 7 key areas of maintaining resilience. I'll just go through these quickly because I think it's important because this is actually a great takeaway for us all when dealing with moments of stress and just managing ourselves day in, day out. So there are 7 key components, and it's measured on a scale of on a percentage scale in terms of how you rate yourself and how you feel, and then essentially what actions that you put in place to address those gaps. So living authentically essentially means living to your values. What are your values first and foremost? And are you living to them? Are you able to realize them within your workplace? And then deploying and working to your strengths, which is something that Jonathan and I discussed just the other day, and the importance of actually deploying your strengths within your work environment to get optimum resilience, but also optimum engagement with what it is that you do. Finding your calling is all around finding purpose in what you do. Can you link your purpose with the work that you do, or is your work your very purpose? But being clear on what that purpose is certainly contributes to a more resilient mindset. Maintaining perspective is all around keeping a realistic mindset in terms of the situation that you're dealing with, being optimistic and keeping a solution-based focus. And I recently had the opportunity to do a course with an ex-Special Forces commander, some 20 years in Special Forces. And he was sharing some of the leadership moments that he had when he had a bad day, somebody died. And that was ground zero. But the reality was anything above that was actually a better day than the last. So maintaining perspective that when you're dealing with adversity, okay, what is the real impact of that situation? Be optimistic, put the process in place to address it, and move towards a solution. Mastering stress is all around balance and offsetting what we do in our work, what we do in our private lives, and maintaining balance within those spheres. Very easily said, but in an age where, as we've said a little earlier, we're fused into one, finding that separation can be a challenge. Interacting cooperatively is essentially around working with people whom you trust to get feedback and advice about the challenges that you're dealing with, either personally or professionally, and drawing on their experience and opinion in dealing with those challenges. And something we've already touched on, the physical and mental well-being, and maintaining that and having routines in place that are non-negotiable in your working day to ensure that you address them. Whether you're an early riser or a late finisher, making sure that throughout the course of your day that you build in those routines, be it any form of exercise, disconnecting from technology, and creating space to refresh your mindset before the next day. And then finally, the network. And this is something that Chris touched on when we were speaking just the other day. The importance of developing a trustworthy network and community within your personal and professional life is actually mission critical. And whether you're in a role at present or you're transitioning into a role, despite all the technology platforms and career platforms and job platforms that are out there, it's ultimately your network that will see you through. And in most cases, will create your next opportunity. So if you're interested in that, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the work of Catherine. It's actually been really, really useful for our organization and something we've deployed throughout it. The way we did it essentially was to create team meetings and allow individuals to undertake the survey, and then we discuss them in a team environment as much as people were comfortable to do so. And then give them the opportunity to debrief with a trained organizational psychologist to improve their own resilience plan.
Bruce, just before we leave the question of networking, Jan Oscar's asked, do you have any advice for creating or maintaining your network in a digital world?
Yes, beware the expert. So expert I'm not, but I was recently, I saw a LinkedIn, I guess it was a summary of how best to use social media platforms to build network. And LinkedIn holds true, is still one of the better platforms, despite not being particularly interesting to navigate through. But the best advice was to actually stay active and engage with professional forums, networking opportunities, and actually reach out to people who are like-minded or work in an area that you're actually interested in developing skills or capability in. But the most important and overriding piece was actually get active, be engaged, allocate time each week to build your network, build a team around you. And you might have heard it referenced before around building Team You. So one of the things I like to do each year is to actually look at who's on my team. And obviously that's my family. I work with a coach, which I'm very privileged to do so. I make sure that I embed time with my coach over the course of each year. I'm very fortunate that I have a very good relationship with my CEO and that I can speak openly with him. In addition to outside of work, I have a mentor that I touch base with periodically as well. So making sure, in addition to being active, that you build a team around you as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that again, having interviewed a lot of leaders over the years, they all have, the successful ones, have this kind of personal council or board of advisors, if you like, around them. And they can be people from, all walks of life. Could be, a godfather, or it could be, a workout buddy. I mean, from different areas, but a core group of people that you can, rely on. And I think particularly in times like these, it's, it's crucial to have that to rely on. And then you can extend, beyond that as well. I think I just want to highlight, one of the things that I've noticed, I guess, during this pandemic is it's really highlighted the strength of community in hospitality. And people have come together even more. And I think actually, to reach out, to your point, Bruce, if you want to reach out to someone, to engage in them, I find that people are a lot more open than perhaps they were before, and willing to take the time and willing to have the conversation. So it's actually a prime time to kind of take advantage of that. If you're looking to build a network from scratch, maybe, like Jan Oscar, kind of, particularly in the early days of your career, this, I think you find people very receptive.
Absolutely. I mean, particularly at the moment, Chris, there's really good appetite to engage. And I certainly saw during the lockdown here that there was a lot of chatter via social media platforms, and there was a lot more engagement than there was prior to it. I think that's continued, but being active and actually putting yourself out there is a great thing to do, as well as having that team around you. If you think about it from a sporting analogy perspective, I mean, the average professional sporting life is, anywhere between 5 to 7 years at the highest end. But if you think about the amount of time that they invest in terms of the network around them, be it a coach, be it an advisor, be it, trainers, masseuses, etc. They have a very extensive team. And given that our working life is going to be between 43 to 47 years, it's a pretty sound investment if you invest into your network, because we don't have the luxury of wrapping things up in the next 5 to 7 years. We've got a long stretch. So it's no longer a marathon, I would say. It's more like an ultra.
Bruce, just going back to the previous slide, I guess my takeaway from this part of the discussion, or at least one of my observations on this, because obviously one of the key aspects, and I think where we get energy from, is kind of living values, deploying strengths, finding purpose, all of these things. But I guess, it's how you discover those and how you find those which are really important. And I guess this goes back to the building team you, having that team around you, and creating that feedback system can help you really identify strengths and also then hone in on what your values, even though you may know what they are, but they maybe become more visible or obvious. And also the same with purpose, combining obviously with self-exploration, but then having that team can really, bring these things through to fruition. Would that be my correct interpretation of this, or there is other ways that you can kind of find values and, discover your values and strengths and purpose?
No, absolutely. I mean, I smiled. I mean, I think it's a lot easier to do that with, trusted people around you than it is to wander off into the wilderness solo and come up with a sense of purpose and values. I think working with that team is mission critical. It helps to shape your thought. You're more open to feedback because you trust those individuals, and you get a more candid view in terms of who you are, and what strengths that you bring to the table. And that's the kind of, gritty and real information we need to really develop those skills and understand what it is that we are actually good at.
Great, thank you, Bruce. I guess that openness is critical then as well, in terms of receiving that feedback in the right way.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot said around growth mindset, but essentially growth mindset has been open to learning. And certainly if you can develop a growth mindset, but being open to that feedback and that new learning and self-reflection is so critical. I think the most dangerous thing a leader can say, or the most dangerous phrase I hear within organizations, is we've always done it this way. We're just not, for me, that sets off, flashing lights and alarm bells, and I just want to change it. But the reality is that that's very dangerous ground, because it means you've stopped moving, you've lost momentum, and you run the risk of becoming stagnant. And as John was saying early on, we're in a VUCA world. We just can't afford to do that.
I found it fascinating, Bruce, recently going through working with the Langley group on this strengths question, and this almost epiphany moment when they said people need to focus on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. All too often we've grown up being told you need to master your weaknesses, go out there and make yourself better in whatever that area. If you hate public speaking, get out, throw yourself out there. And of course that just leads to having a horrendous experience, a miserable working existence trying to improve your weaknesses. And what they were saying was, actually, if we focus on our strengths and play to our strengths and build our strengths, we accept and acknowledge our weaknesses, and we certainly have to work with our network, with our team, whatever, to manage those weaknesses, certainly within a work and a team environment, your life can be that much more fulfilling. strength focus rather than weakness focus. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Gallup organization's done a lot of work in that area. And we've deployed strength-based coaches within our organization to work with emerging leaders and existing leaders on identifying what their key strengths are. But you're absolutely right. And if you think back to a previous conversation we had with regard to the performance management process, which is typically a 6-monthly or annual conversation, and the biggest mistake you can make in that conversation is to have a conversation with the team member about what they're not good at. That's really an opportunity for you to say, here's what I loved about what you've done, and here's what I'd like you to focus on going forward. And those more difficult conversations need to happen, immediately over the course of your working day or over the course of a working week, and use those performance management or performance review discussions as an opportunity to talk about growth and development and deploying your strengths.
Bruce,
So that, just before we move, so are you about to intro the question? Sean's just asked the question, and I thought it's a nice wrap up actually around the practicalities of this. Sean asks if you've come across any companies that have adapted well to this new pandemic era using the techniques that you've been discussing today. Are you aware of anyone that's put this to particularly strong use?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there are there's an organization by the name of Atlassian that have done it very well. I've seen also within hospitality, actually, particularly around the coaching piece and online learning, that have actually done it quite well. I mean, I'm very grateful that our own organization has deployed it, strength-based coaching, throughout the organization, even during the pandemic. I mean, it's come through our corporate office in Orlando, but they've actually, committed to rolling out the program regardless of where we are now. Sure, it was stopped when we were first dealing with the pandemic, but I think it's actually been quite well done, very well done within my own organization. So I'd be happy to engage with anybody that wanted to discuss that in a bit more detail in terms of what process we went through and to gain more insight into the Gallup program. It's actually been something that's been quite fundamental.
Great, Josh. We move on to the
So I mean, I'm conscious of time as well, and so I'll move on a little, and because this is something we did want to touch on, and it's often a subject that can be overcomplicated. Personal brand matters as much now as it ever did. It's how we actually get that brand across that's the core challenge. The reality is, a lot of what we're doing at the moment is online, is virtual. But I wanted to demystify what personal brand is, but also say that it's actually really important that you continue to build personal brand, being in transition or even in an existing role. So your personal brand, I think, in terms of definition, was best described by Jeff Bezos. It's essentially what people say about you when you're not in the room. So it's your reputation. And there are 3 core areas that I've identified. And the first of which is the recognition. And the recognition piece is important because it's actually about what you do, what you actually do. When it comes to reputation, it's about how you do it, and it's about the quality of your work. And then finally, on the respect side, that's really around what values you apply to achieve the results that you achieve. It doesn't need to be any more complex than that, but it's around consistency. So what you do, how you do it, the quality of your work, and ultimately the values that define you in terms of how you implement that work. And it needs to be consistent, because I'm sure we've all seen examples over the courses of our own careers where there have been incredibly well respected people with a very strong personal brand that have disrailed, not through competence and capability, but through behaviors, and that brand has been eroded very quickly. And it's almost impossible, certainly within a public forum, to regain that brand strength. Very, very difficult. So just moving towards a summary, because we've covered a lot and there's been some really great questions on the way through. So building resilience. Resilience is no longer optional, and we need a plan in place in which to build it. It's a lot easier if it's built on a foundation of values. So what values define you? Who are you, and what values do you live by? Self-awareness is a combination of your behaviors, your cognitive capability, and as we touched on, the strengths that you have in terms of an offering to an organization, and you deploy day in, day out. Creating a purpose in terms of why you do what you do, and aligning that purpose with some goals which move you closer towards it. And then, of course, building the actions in place that move you towards the achievement of those goals. So that in itself, in terms of application, sounds quite simplistic, but it involves a lot of work in terms of actually getting there. But as a model, that's quite a useful model to take away and say, okay, what are my values? What are my strengths? And what is my purpose? And build from there.
Bruce, this is obviously, I think it's a simplistic model, but it's a very powerful model. I know we're relatively short of time, but I was just wondering if you could bring this to life for us without putting you on the spot. Is this something that you've followed yourself? And if so, could you maybe just take us quickly through that journey of how you did this? Or do you know somebody that's actually been through this, maybe a colleague or a friend or somebody that you've observed go through this process, and maybe explain, what they went through and how they did it and where they are today as a consequence?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to put myself on the line if it helps in terms of rationalizing it. I mean, from my own perspective, I've always invested in working with an external coach, but I guess where it really came into focus for me was when I was involved with an organization. I'd been with them for some time. Things were going quite nicely, and then GFC hit, and as a result, my role was actually made redundant, which sent me into a bit of a spiral in terms of what's next. So I actually went to work on applying this actual model, and this is derived from my own experience, but also through a lot of research in terms of coaching platforms that I've had the opportunity to work with, but also research. But so I went through a process of actually defining what is my purpose. What is it I want to do in terms of a legacy that I want to leave? And quite simply, it's a statement that is along the lines of to realize my potential while developing others. And that was the first question for me. And then second to that, I'd ask myself, perhaps in parallel, what are the core values that define me as an individual? From there, I went through and worked with this coach to understand a little bit more around my behaviors. So what is my behavioral style? What is my cognitive capability, good or bad? Understand what you're good at, but also know what you're not good at. So I know categorically that if you give me a spreadsheet, give me a bit of time, I'll understand it, but don't ask me to put that spreadsheet together, or I'll put an organization into a tremor. But from that point of view, it's about understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are and being aware of them. And then also giving yourself the opportunity to utilize them within your working day. From there, I then went about setting some goals, and those goals were around securing my next opportunity, making sure that next opportunity was in a sphere and with a company that aligned with my values and aligned with my purpose and allowed me to use my strengths. And then from there, it was really just a case of putting in those actions. What did I need to do? What network groups did I need to be part of in terms of actions? What forums did I need to join? What organizations did I want to target? and how much time did I spend each day in terms of moving towards those goals through my actions. And then taking the time to reflect in terms of what have I done lately to move me towards my purpose. Which is, I mean, that's a quick example, but quite a powerful one for me.
I wonder, Bruce, if you'd also agree around the importance of review and how often we think we know what our purpose is and we know what, we know what our goals are because we did it when we were 25, and actually accepting that these change through different stages of our lives, and the importance of coming back to this exercise, reviewing what's changed. Is my purpose the same? Have my goals changed? Do I need to change? Just that importance of review. Would you recognize that as an exercise for many people to undertake?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And yeah, that's a really great point, actually, John. The reality is we don't give ourselves the allowance or enough time to actually do that, because we're caught in an activity trap or a task trap, and we're measured on what we do. We don't get measured on our reflections. And that's the commercial reality. But giving yourself time to do so is so important, because we're constantly evolving. How we think based on the experiences that we have, what we learn, what we do, what we see is constantly changing. And if we don't take a moment to step back and reflect and learn from that, then we miss just an absolute golden moment to realize our own potential. So in essence, that is, perhaps quite a simplistic model, as you say, but the intent is that it's an easy model to follow, and it doesn't need to be complicated. So what next? I mean, I think the reality is give yourself the challenge of getting to know yourself, whether you have the opportunity to work with a coach, work with somebody who you trust or know, or a peer group. Take the opportunity to really invest in understanding who you are behaviorally and cognitively, what it is that you're good at and that you enjoy doing. And then creating a career and life plan with purpose, be it transition, or if you're in a current role at present and you've got the opportunity to reflect on where you are. I think a couple of other key points in there that we've touched on the way through is that, reinvention and ongoing learning and that growth mindset is critical. And having a very structured resilience plan is critical. Going to the gym is not enough. Disconnecting from your phone for an hour a week isn't enough. You've got to have a structured plan in place. And in fact, many people can overcompensate in one area on the resilience model that I introduced at the detriment of other areas. And typically for those of the alpha mindset, the offset is to go to the gym. I've finished my day. I'm going to actually go and smash myself at the gym now, which is not the best course of action. So keep it balanced. Keeping yourself informed and identifying future trends and making sure that you're ahead of the curve in terms of innovations that are taking place within your sphere of industry. And understand that network and community piece is really important for you going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruce. I'm just going to do a very quick wrap up. My kind of takeaways on top of this quick summary. I think there's a really great opportunity to kind of build Team U. Look at who that might involve: family, friends, coaching, mentors, etc. Keep a growth mindset. Look at feedback loop at all times. I like the idea of this strength-based coaching. I think that's a great opportunity. You define it as it's what you do, how you do it, and consistency. And the opportunity is really about reinventing ourselves always. So I really appreciate the session, Bruce. I'm gonna pass over to John Huzan, who's going to do a final wrap up, and Chris for the close of the session. I'd just like to mention, Chris, maybe before we close, if you wouldn't mind just kind of reminding the folks about the Hospitality Resilience Survey, that they spread the word on that one. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, just thanks, Jonathan. Just first of all, big thanks, Bruce. Really appreciate you taking time in your busy day to put this together and to take the time to speak to us. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think we could easily have continued probably for another hour. So that's always a good sign. So again, many thanks from all of us. Just before I pass to John, as Jonathan mentioned, we are launching next week the Hospitality Resilience Survey, which is a hospitality industry specific survey of resilience levels among our workforces and our population in the industry, which is something we intend to start measuring over time. We're doing this in conjunction with the University of Central Florida and their psychology department, with a view to them being able to take learnings out of that study to help hospitality organizations assist their employee bases build greater resilience and strength of resilience. So look out for that. That will be hitting the airwaves next week, and look forward to hopefully getting as much participation and robust data as we can. So John, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks again, Bruce. Fascinating. I think Chris is quite right. We could have gone on for hours. So, and thank you to everyone who joined us, who carved out some time in their busy days to join us today. Thank you. We're back again on Wednesday, the 14th of April, for a discussion with Yves Girel, Senior Vice President, Human Resources at Hyatt, around how Hyatt have incorporated mindfulness and other techniques into their culture moving forward. So thank you once again for joining us. Thanks so much for Bruce and the co-hosts, Chris Mumford, Jonathan Humphreys. Do join us again when we're back on the 14th of April. Thanks.